No, very good. So I'm gonna take a few minutes to talk about your new album, Precarious Towers. I don't think we've talked since probably 2018 or so. I think we
That's
talked.
yeah, that's true. You did review my previous album, yeah, my 2021 album, but we didn't talk at the time. So right,
Right. I think we talked
appreciate
about
that.
Love Wins. So
Hmm.
this is your 10th album. And uh, I love the title because it really talks a lot about what we're going through now. When did you start this project in terms of the writing process?
Well, so in I think in 2019, I got the idea of this particular band.
Mhm.
All the people here, it's sort of an all-star band of people from the Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison area, and they're all people that I've worked with in some to some extent. The bass player and drummer Devin Dropka, and John Christensen, the bassist, and Devin Dropka, the drummer, and we've been playing together pretty much since I've moved to Madison 10 years ago, and fairly regularly.
Mhm.
And then a couple of years ago, I discovered that Mitch Shiner, who's a fabulous drummer, and I've worked with him in that capacity, is also a great vibraphonist. And I heard that from other people, that I finally got a chance to play with him, and
Mhm.
that confirmed what I'd heard, and had a chance to work with Sherelle and so on, but never in that configuration. And I thought, hey, it would be great to get all these people on the same stage. So in 2019, I pitched the idea. They're all really busy. So in 2019, I pitched the idea of this band, and me writing music for that
Mhm.
band, to this concert series for local and regional composers from the South Central Wisconsin area, and they accepted me on the series, and I started writing music for it. And then the pandemic hit, and it became, and because the date was supposed to be October 2020, and the pandemic hit, and it became sort of unclear of whether it would go ahead. So for a while, the project was kind of up in the air, but I didn't have anything to do that summer because we're all
Mhm.
just locked up at home and going for long walks with the dogs, and that was kind of it. So I kept writing music. So most of the music was written after the pandemic started, but the idea of the band really preceded it.
Okay. Okay. So, in terms of the recording process, it's mostly Chicago group. Where did you record the album?
Well, we recorded in Madison, and
Okay.
and it was, and we recorded February of 21, and uh, as you recall, that was really before the vaccines were available to anyone
Right.
but healthcare workers, and but at that point we'd been sort of in this emergency pandemic stage long enough to
Mhm.
start figuring out like how we could actually make music together. So in the summer of 2020, that meant doing stuff outdoors, and then the concert actually, that first premiere concert of the compositions took place in October. And we did it on a concert stage in a concert hall
Mhm.
that can fit a full symphony orchestra. And there was the five of us on the stage and 1,100 empty seats and a skeletal camera and sound crew with good ventilation. But you don't have access to that kind of hall very often.
Mhm.
But working with my students, we sort of stumbled upon the idea that going into a into a recording studio could be kind of a COVID safe space, because of course recording studios have ISO booths that are designed to isolate sound, but they do that by isolating air. They essentially, pretty much airproof little rooms to stick a soloist in.
Mhm.
And we sort of changed things up. And normally I would have put the bass in that ISO booth, but the bass wasn't the problem here. It was the saxophone with the
Mm.
one player who couldn't play with a mask on. So we had two ISO booths, and we put drums in one because drums are loud, and that's still a
Mhm.
recording issue, and saxophone in the other one, so that she could take off, Sherelle could take off her mask and just blow air to her heart's content, and
Right.
as we wanted her to. And and then we recorded the album in the studio with everybody else masked and in different rooms, but being able to play at the same time, which for people who aren't really familiar with the technology, when we see, and we've all gotten used to seeing these sort of Brady Bunch multi-panel style videos, none of
Mhm.
those are done in real time. They've really done one one player at a time, additive, and that wasn't going to work for this band and for this
Right,
music.
right.
Have the interaction of playing together.
Yeah, I would imagine that you certainly need that. And this was recorded in a relatively short period of time. But for you, that's not unusual, is it?
Well, I mean, to be honest, 2 full days of recording feels pretty luxurious for a lot of jazz albums. When we think about a lot of, that's the old Blue Note model. So, I think the reason everybody, who wasn't on the really big labels wanted to record for Blue Notes, eh, for Blue Note is because unlike Prestige, unlike Pablo, unlike all the other like small labels, which did albums in one day, Blue Note would pay for 2 days of recording, which was, and so that's what we did. And honestly, we recorded almost everything on the first day, and then set aside the second day to revisit things that maybe we hadn't been perfectly happy with, or where we kind of felt like, oh, if we can take another shot at this, we'll see how we'll see how it goes, and almost everything ended up being from the first day because there's so a nice energy to first takes, second takes. After the second take, it's pretty rare that you're going to hit on the magic after that. So it's mostly the first day, and then the second day we had a full day booked, but we just did a half day, and then the engineer and I kind of got a head start on mixing it because we sort of felt like we got what we wanted, and yeah.
So in terms of arrangements, most of that obviously was done before the recording was done. So the players had an idea what they were going to be doing.
Right. So that October concert, we got an opportunity to rehearse for it, and the music was written for that. We rehearsed for it, and then we did another rehearsal for the recording session as well. So a lot of some pre-production. Not quite the ideal scenario, which is really rare these days anyway, which is that you take the band on the road and you
Test it.
and yeah, exactly, and you perform it on a tour, and then you go in the recording studio. But that's always been pretty hard to pull off because most of the time to have a successful tour, you need to have an album to promote. So usually the album comes before the tour, and then at the end of the tour, you find yourself going, "Oh, I wish we could record the music now because of how how much it has developed." But so in this case, at least we got to test drive it once and do some rehearsing.
Do you think you have an opportunity this summer to play it live?
Oh yeah, we I think at this point I have 6 dates booked for the band. So
Okay.
all in this region. Yeah, it's still hard to to hit the road with it, but we got 6 performances coming up through the summer, some festival things and so on. So it's I'm excited. The album release date is June 3rd, and we're doing 3 dates right back to back, June 3rd, June 4th, and June 11th in Madison and Milwaukee,
Oh, fantastic.
and then more stuff throughout the summer.
Through the Midwest.
Yes.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about wanting to incorporate the vibraphone into the recording, and Mitch Shiner, I think, was a vibe player.
hmm
And you also use Sherelle Cassidy as alto saxophone. You said the players you've pretty much met through your community in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin.
Yeah. So this is something I didn't really know, but I before I moved here, but I got a sense that it was the case. Which I moved to Madison. I moved to the Midwest 10 years ago from from the San Francisco Bay Area. Spent 5 years there. Spent 10 years in New York. 12 years in New York, and Madison is by far the smallest city I've lived in as an adult. So even though I have a great university job here, there was some skepticism of whether taking a job like that would work because would there be enough players of a high caliber to work with, and I'd been to Madison a few times on tour, and but then also once a little bit longer just for social reasons in 2011, and I'd heard some really fabulous musicians here, and I thought that's if I heard a Latin jazz group that would have not seemed at all out of place in San Francisco, Oakland,
Right.
where there's just a great scene. And I thought, man, if those musicians are here, there's got to be other ones too. And I started talking to them. People said, yeah, it's cool. And it turns out, it's true. The bench isn't anywhere near as deep as it would be in a bigger city, but
Mhm.
the top players here, people like the folks I'm recording with, they could easily, I mean, they could have a very successful career, in the big cities on the coast as well. And for whatever reason, they chose to be here, and I'm grateful that they are, because I get to play with just fabulous players. And of course, Chicago has always had a great scene.
Sure, it's very close by. And I imagine a lot of your students gravitate to your university because of the reputation that it has, and in terms of, and also because of some of the musicians in the area.
Yeah, exactly. And Madison is a city that really punches above its weight class when it comes to culture. I mean,
Culture.
we're a full-time jazz club. We have two other jazz venues that present jazz several times a week.
Mhm.
And as well as that sort of typical assortment of coffee shops and bars and so on that will present jazz from time to time. There's two symphony orchestras here, and just a huge amount of support for culture, and that kind of extends everywhere. There's a lot of touring artists who will stop by here. I mean, it's relatively rare that we're the only stop for somebody, but if they're routing through Chicago and the Twin Cities, it makes sense to do a
Sure.
stop over here. And
Yeah, Madison's close by. Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about some of the songs on the album. And I know that I think they're all original compositions, with the exception of Angel Eyes.
Yeah, so Angel Eyes, I've been playing since I think I was 15 years old, and it's one of those pieces that I've always loved, and it kind of keeps evolving for me. And 10 years ago or so, I came up with an arrangement of it that I thought really kind of uniquely, it would sort of put a unique stamp, a personal stamp on the piece, that connected for me. And as we're getting ready to make the album, I brought it into rehearsal, and in the one rehearsal that we had specifically for the recording session, and thought, hey, maybe we can test drive this, because I've always wanted to record this piece. I think it would sound really great with I thought Sherelle would just sound wonderful on it.
Mhm.
And then we started playing it, and I realized this is not the key that I think I really want. Sure, yeah, I'm really hearing Sherelle connect to with this
Mhm.
piece, because every piece, of course, kind of like it lives in a certain range on the instrument, and and then the key sort of seemed like a better fit maybe for a tenor saxophonist, or maybe for a different alto saxophonist who kind of hears the music in a different range. So I can't, yeah. So I, after the rehearsal, I went back home, tried some different keys, and found that a lot of that worked really well. But then there were other parts of the piece that didn't work as well, and kind of created this neat conundrum until finally I just decided we're going to play it in both keys. So so unlike the way the piece is usually played, it actually it's usually done in C minor, and then the bridge goes all over the place, and we're starting it in A minor and ending it in C minor, and the bridge goes even more places in between. So and sort of grabs a few influences from Billy Strayhorn and Coltrane, like harmonically and melodically as well.
So it's more common that it's usually played by tenor sax as opposed to alto.
Well, if it's in that key, just to my ears, it seems like it would be a better fit for tenor saxophone or
Okay.
trumpet than for an alto saxophone. And of course, it's a song, so if you listen to all the different singers who've done it, we've probably covered all 12 keys out there somewhere. That somebody said, "I want to do it here." And that, and working with singers, it's really I've gotten this appreciation for finding the right key for a song.
Mhm.
I think we expect singers to do that. But then the other big influence with that was listening to Hank Mobley, and realizing that Hank Mobley pretty much never played a song in the key that it was normally done by instrumentalists.
That's
He
interesting.
always found the right key for him, that just put that melody in that totally sweet spot on the horn. And and of course, if you now have a piece in a certain key, and that's a key that you feel comfortable in, so on, it can be hard to let go of that and say, like, well, actually, for this instrument, for this group of instruments, maybe we should move it up a step, or third or fifth, and just do the work and relearn the piece.
Mhm.
But it's worth it.
That's interesting because it does make something new out of something which could be a classic or traditional. It makes it totally new.
Yeah, well, and hopefully, with something like a key, hopefully it's something that people don't even notice. It's just kind of the behind the scenes thing that if people notice the key, it's probably because something isn't working. It's like, oh man, that player is really straining to hit those notes, or it's kind of muddy and like that, down there. If you find the right, if you find the perfect key for something, people will never know.
Okay. So what about the song December?
So, um, I have some good. I think I have some good titles on this album, and this one, that's just a punt. I wrote the piece in December, and it was a working title, and kind of, and it stuck. Yeah, I was just trying to write like a pretty song. And that's kind of the case for a lot of these pieces. They're not. They're maybe most of them are not as complex as what I sometimes do with other bands.
Mhm.
But I just with this band, I wanted to let the chemistry of the band really speak and just and let people connect. So that one was kind of it's sort of the pop song on the album in a certain way. It's I've never been somebody to do Radiohead covers. Uh, just in part because so many other people have done that so successfully, but this
Mhm.
sort of feels like it could stand between, next to some of those kind of things that some of my favorites. you know I I was about to call them younger only because they're like either my age or only slightly older than me, but that doesn't really qualify anymore. But like the sort of like Aaron Parks, Brad Maldo, kind of songs. I didn't set out to do that, but that's what it came. I think that's sort of what it came out to be.
So accessible, you mean more accessible?
Yeah, yeah, I guess
Okay.
so.
Then let's go to Never Pet a Burning Dog.
Hmm.
And in ter-
Yeah. So that tune that's been around. That's the oldest one out of the bunch. That I
okay.
wrote that one maybe 5 years ago or so, and then I got stuck with it because uh, so many compositions. Sort of a really common formula in composing is that you write one thing and then you write a contrasting section to it. So something that creates contrast. So that's the classic AABA format of the Great American Songbook. There's an A section that repeat where the melody repeats the same way but with some new lyrics, and then there's a harmonically and melodically contrasting bridge section, and again return to the A section. And in a way, that formula goes back to go. It's just a classic formula. It's the same with a Beethoven symphony where you get like the da 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 da, and that's your A section, and
Mhm.
do 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 do, and then you get the pastoral, which is very very different in character, and so on. So with this piece, I wrote the first part, and then I tried to write a contrasting section, and it took me 5 years
Oh.
to get to the point where I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm not going to write a contrasting section. I'm just going to go with what I have and bring that in to the band and see how they play it. And it turns out the piece never needed a contrasting section. So 5 years I sat on on my piano with me laboring over the second half, and then the simple solution was I just didn't need it, and it was just a fun piece to blow on, kind of a high energy piece, and
Mhm.
yeah, and I kind of just ended up owning that because I was looking for something that would let the piece breathe a little bit more.
Mhm.
And and it turns out, you know what? Yeah, when you play with players who are really sensitive to, just who are creative and who are musically sensitive to the situation, if you bring in a piece where maybe that sort of like those moments where the piece doesn't breathe aren't built into the piece, they'll make those moments happen. They'll do that in how they're playing. So turns out it just
Great.
needed the right players.
Very good. Um, the last song of the album, Saturday Night Meat Raffle.
Yeah. All right. So there's a whole lot to unpack there. So first of all, I wrote this piece. This is one of the first things I wrote during the pandemic, and I started. Yeah, I basically wrote this within a couple of weeks of the shutdown because
Mhm.
I teach at the University of Wisconsin, and I teach jazz ensembles amongst other things and a big band. So we sent all the students home, as did every university,
Yeah.
and then we were told, well, okay, continue teaching them, but remotely, and which is a special problem for jazz ensembles.
That's an
And
understatement, but okay.
yes, so then we set out to do essentially, this multi-panel video type of thing, but with small groups and without the video aspect, because the technology. I mean, we're dealing with like such fundamental things of like some of the students went home without their instruments and things like or didn't have microphones or had never recorded themselves before, or some, with some of our non-music majors and so on. So trying to kind of keep it simple, but also make it a special experience for everybody when almost everything else that they'd been doing had fallen apart. I wrote music for small groups, for groups of 3 or 4 students, to record themselves, so it would be technologically manageable. And one of the groups was the rhythm section from the big band, which was vibraphone, piano, bass, drums. And knowing that I had this other project with my own band with vibraphone coming up, I was thinking about my students, and I was also thinking about the professional band. And as I was writing the as I was writing the piece of music, I thought, hey, maybe like this is something I can do with some friends of mine as well. Maybe do one of these multi-panel videos. And the drummer on the project was a huge Frank Zappa fan, and I realized, and he'd been my college room, my freshman college roommate, and I'd never listened to Frank Zappa before my freshman year in college, and then I got a really big dose of like Frank Zappa. Luckily, we also shared a lot of common tastes. Like this was Berklee College of Music, so he was into Miles Davis and Tony Williams and Herbie Hancock and so on. So we got along great. But does that the amount of Zappa was a bit overwhelming at the time, but I also appreciated some of the music as well. And one thing that really stuck with me was the music that Frank Zappa wrote for his keyboard percussionist, meaning marimba, vibraphone, mallet percussion.
Mhm.
Ruth Underwood, who was just an incredible percussionist, and he wrote these rhythmically, intervallically, super complex things that essentially sounded like somebody animatedly like talking, or so very very similar to his guitar parts and his melodies in general. That when you see them on paper, they just look completely forbidding, and when you sort of put words to them or imagine words, they actually make sense because they kind of follow speech patterns. So I was trying to write, a vibraphone part like that, and thought like, well, if this is what Ruth Underwood plays with Zappa, like it must be pretty playable on, the instrument.
Mhm.
Well, then my students started playing it, and it turns out I wrote an incredibly difficult vibraphone part because I'm not a vibraphonist. And we ended up recording it, but a little bit below tempo, but it went well enough. And I thought like, okay, that sounded okay, but I really want to like do this with my friends and professional musicians who I think can bring that extra spark to it. And uh, so so then Mitch started like shedding the music, and he told me, man, this is some hard stuff. I'm like, all right, cool. Can you do it? He's like, yeah, I can do it, but it's hard. I'm like, okay. And then after that October concert, I thought, well, that doesn't seem fair that I stuck Mitch with this, and it would be kind of nice to hear a second instrument on the melody.
Mhm.
I'm going to learn this too. And it turns out it's really hard on piano too. And then finally, I was like, well, if I'm going to put in the work, I'm going to ask Sherelle if she can like try it too. And it turns out it's also really hard on saxophone, but hopefully it doesn't sound difficult. It just sounds quirky. So this sort of quirky, Zappa-inspired sound. In the end, what I was trying to do with this is create opportunities for social interaction. Yeah, for us to, even though we were disconnected from each other, I was trying to create opportunities for people to socially make music with each other, whether it's in
Mhm.
real time or like one track at a time. And that made me think of this Midwestern and particularly Wisconsin tradition that I'd never heard of before I moved here, but I thought it was just so quirky and fun as an idea, which is the meat raffle. And a meat raffle is literally what it sounds like. You go to a bar on a Friday night, on a Saturday night, and there's a pile of frozen meat, different cuts and steaks and what have you, and hamburgers. And then you buy a raffle ticket. And at the end of the night, they do a raffle, and somebody wins a pile of meat. And you take it home, you put it in your freezer, and you know,
Ah.
yeah, I know it's kind of nuts and kind of charming and just weird and quirky and like just a local thing. So I thought, man, this is exactly the sort of thing that Frank Zappa would just get, like, would have gotten a huge kick out of. It's a very Zappa-esque kind of title. And of course, especially because it has like, sort of a second connotation as well. And like, the sort of meat market experience of perhaps going to a meat raffle as well.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. Is there anything else you want to talk about or add about the album?
Um, Goodness. Well, let me tell you about two more songs.
Okay.
So one of them is just, and it's very straightforward. I don't think there's any particular mystery to it. I wrote it early in the pandemic, but it's actually inspired by something that happened right before the pandemic, which is that the great McCoy Tyner passed away in early 2020.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to write a piece of music for him because I think probably over the years he's been my biggest inspiration and influence. And probably earlier on in my life, I would have tried to sort of just hide that in some, to focus on my own personal style and so on, and perhaps worry about doing something that may seem a little derivative or so. And now that I'm squarely middle aged, I just felt like I've been at this long enough. This here is just an offering that like I'm off like just an acknowledgement of all the different ways in which McCoy has influenced me. So it's my tribute to McCoy, and and it's and trying to sort of like touch on a bunch of the things that I love about his playing and his music and so on. So that's the piece McCoy, and then the first piece, the title track of the album, Precarious Towers. Hopefully the album cover makes apparent that it's a very playful title. Actually, it's not supposed to be overly ominous. And really, that came about just playing with my daughter, who, when she was 3, we used to spend hours building very tall towers out of Duplo Legos that, as they got taller and taller, would become more ornate with like different things branching off in different directions, and eventually would become very unstable. And she loves language and words and so on. So she loved talking with me about like, Papa, let's build more precarious towers. And then she would take great pleasure in them eventually collapsing under their like poor architectural design and just overall hubris of like building this thing taller and taller in there. And that's just that joyfulness of like building something and watching it collapse and building it again, and taking joy in how precarious the whole design of it was. That was really the inspiration behind the track. And then it's kind of it's a striking title, so I thought it would work for the album. And by now I'm actually calling the band, but it's the Precarious Towers, Johannes Wallman and Precarious Towers. That's the name of the band now, but it really just started out of like just a joyful experience of building and building things.
Thank you for that. Those were actually the 2 songs I wasn't going to ask you about, but I do love both of those songs, and I love the album. So,
thank you.
Anything else you want to add?
Oh, I think I covered it.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. I'm going to probably review this week, and